You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, everybody, I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for the show, as always. And of course, again, we're not easy to find when we stream. We were supposed to go on last night at 8, then 9, then it became today at 8, but Here we are. We are on. And we're talking about the future of the Force. Did you find this one?
Yep.
Okay. And it's like I lost track. All right, so go ahead and basically tell everybody pretty much like what led up to it. Whatever. Oh, but before you do, I want to get this. I want to get this on because this is important. This is almost kind of like that like and subscribe, which, hey, by the way, I mean, if you feel so inclined.
You mentioned it.
Yeah, I mean, let's get it out of the way now. Go ahead and like and subscribe to this channel. Trust me, you'll like this episode. Ted says, glad I get the email notification. See, that's it. If you actually click that notification bell, you will get the notification that we're going live and that we, in fact, are live. So, just thought I'd put that out there since that was an unsolicited chat from one of our regular, wonderful viewers, Ted Adam Green. Thank you, Ted. Glad you were awake for this one. So go ahead.
Right.
Let us know what it was that appealed to you or whatever, why you decided to do this one.
Well, this for everyone listening and or watching. This is probably going to be a very in-depth conversation that it may take more than one episode to actually cover all of this, because this is a very, much like the Force, it's a very vast discussion. But this kind of came about just because I was trying to find something. I couldn't really find anything. And then I started thinking about the upcoming series and not series, but upcoming trilogies that are in the wind. And then also different projects that are coming up. So one being Dawn of the Jedi, at least that's what we're calling it right now. We haven't got an official title, but essentially it's the story of, the whole Jedi Sith thing that's taking place 10,000 years before the events of the Phantom Menace. And then there's the ever-threatening Rey movie, that keeps being on and off. It's like a bad relationship. We have a toxic relationship with Star Wars, apparently. But it made me started thinking about the Force. And when we look at Star Wars, we often say, we want them to kind of redo the original trilogy because they can update it. They can fix the plot holes. They can do a lot of different things if they redid the original trilogy, right? And we can make it kind of, for example, the lightsaber duels. We can make them more faster and up to date, so they don't look so, Knights of the Round Table, King Arthur-ish. We can actually have it more like episode 1, 2, and 3 and have that continuity. But when you talk about the Force now, we've seen iterations of it, like in the Clone Wars. And remember those, we often bring up those little shorts that they used to have, the Star Wars shorts, where Yoda will wave his hand and like 10,000 like droids will go flying everywhere. If they do something, or if they start to move forward with the franchise, and we've often talked about how they've dealt with the war, but now if they start dealing with the lore of Star Wars, are they going to change how they utilize the Force in this situation? For example, Rey rebuilding the Jedi Order, if she's rebuilding it in a way that she's like, okay, well, some of the things I liked from the old way, some of the things I didn't like, and maybe we should look at the Force in this manner. So there's different ideologies on how the Force should be used. There's different things as far as, will we see more uses of the Force where it's like more than just lifting rocks and pulling lightsabers to your hand or maybe choking someone. Now we can see like what we see in the animations where, hey, someone waves their hand, someone who's super powerful, and you really truly see that, like, oh, okay. like even when Yoda in episode 2, when Dooku dropped those rocks on him, and he kind of caught it, he kind of threw him aside, but it seemed like they were struggling even just a little bit. But it seems like with someone like Yoda, who's like a grandmaster, it seems like he should be able to just do this and it just drops. So my whole thing is the way they utilize the Force, their ideals of the Force, and then how they're actually going to showcase the Force. Are we going to see more things where it's more like the video games where we're seeing people pulling or even the books when you hear about people pulling star destroyers out of this atmosphere? Are we going to see stuff like that?
Yeah, well, okay, so I'm glad you got into this. We got Travis Mitchell with us. He says, "How's it going, guys?" And then
Hey.
also says, "One thing that possibly holds the franchise back and makes it less tangible is how the Jedi religion keeps coming back. The real world has dead languages like Latin that are studied but not used." Yeah, I mean, and this actually fits nicely in with the point that I was going to make, because you referenced the video games in particular, and that's what I was thinking a lot when you were framing this, is that you have almost an imbalance between how the Jedi use the Force in the films, even a little bit in the TV shows, although it's improved a little bit, and then what you see, like you said, in a lot of the books or comics or primarily the video games. There's a disparity. Even Kurosawa, who was the guy that did the original Little Clone Wars shorts? I always forget that guy's name.
Oh, the actual director? Or
yeah, like the guy that basically did them, right? I mean, it was because
I don't know.
Yeah, it led up. Well, whatever. I mean, everybody knows what I'm talking about. You can look it up, and I'm sure somebody might chat it in, perhaps. But the idea behind it was you had that battle, with Yoda, where he's waving his hands, and all these droids just go flying, and you have this kind of power, which is what you would expect from these guys that have such a command over this, right? I mean, to me, that was a little bit more of a realistic thing, whereas I think what Lucas was going for was something grounded. You mentioned Yoda,
right?
Catching that rock or whatever that was about to crush Obi-Wan and Anakin in episode 2, and then shoves it aside. And I think that was more to make it a little bit less fantastical and put it more into perhaps what he would perceive as a real world use of this.
Right.
And yes, I think there is a little bit of a frustration between where are we going to go with this, because I brought this up even in episode 1, where why didn't they sense the fish? You got a Jedi Master and a Padawan that's pretty far along. Neither one of them really. And again, it's probably because, it creates suspense, and Lucas constantly reminds us that, look, these are for kids. Don't read too much into it. It's more about the macro than the micro, that kind of a thing. But the problem is, when you have a franchise that's pretty much almost 50 years old at this point, there really is nowhere left to go but the micro. I mean, you can't keep doing the macro the whole time, because otherwise, it's like a puddle more than an ocean. I mean, there's no depth to it. Now, Travis has gotten quite chatty, actually. It's good. It's what we want. It says, what happens 1,000 years after the Skywalkers are gone? With each generation, it becomes less likely that someone will carry on the Force studies.
Why do you think that, though?
Well, he says, what happens in a world where there is no order or religion for the Force? It's just people born with it, similar to a mutant gene in the X-Men, learning to use it individually instead of an orthodox. And I mean, that's another good point, too. And we've touched upon this on past shows as well, where it's less of a group mentality and an organizational thing and more of an individualistic thing. But I don't know if that would necessarily make good. You also got to keep in mind, this is entertainment.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to see the armies versus, rather than a bunch of, I mean, this is where you have to maybe you have to separate it a little bit from reality in that sense, right? Because there is that temptation. Travis kind of touches upon it where it's like, well, this is what happens like in reality. But as Lucas himself would remind us all, this is sci-fi fantasy. This is very much of a fantasy thing. Now, you can go into that and say, well, in a lot of cases, even in the fantasy realm, where you have these magic users and stuff, they're not necessarily, I mean, yeah, a lot of times they're part of a guild or something like that, but not always. And you can have
Hmm.
that. You can have force users that aren't necessarily tied to some sort of an organization, but at the same time, again, the Jedi and the Sith are fairly well established, and I think it goes into what you're talking about, where it's like, okay, well, what are you going to do with them moving forward?
Well, even to Travis's, point, I mean, and I understand where he's going with it, but I would like to bring this to his attention. That line of thinking would almost be kind of like saying, why does the military still use martial arts to train their soldiers when martial arts has been around since for centuries? But they still train, even though they have guns, missiles, and all this other stuff, they still train hand to hand combat. So that's another thing is that, yeah, something like the force has been around forever, with so it's martial arts. That's things go, you know, back to almost not quite biblical days, but almost that far back. So when you just had farmers who just used, how they came up with this stuff. But yet people are still signing up for it today. People still opening up dojos. People still watching shows like Cobra Kai because, we like, the whole lore of it, the whole mysticism kind of, people still arguing is Bruce Lee the greatest martial artist ever? These are still the conversations that we're having this day. And Bruce has been dead for like, what, 50 years almost?
Yeah.
So, that's what I'm saying. It's like, these things still exist, and people are still having these conversations, and I think that it never really goes away. And I think people will always try to figure out um how to best utilize something. So even with the X-Men, I mean, I'm sure there'll be a new Charles Xavier at some point because the world would need that. And once you kind of establish there's a it's almost kind of like even the civil rights movement, right? That started back in the 60s, but okay, we're not, you don't obviously have, you know, segregation and things like that going on, but you still have these entities like NAACP, which still lives on and still doing things in the community, still helping out. So, like, there's always going to be a need for something. And that's all I'm saying. So I think
Yeah, the
that even with Star Wars,
organizational
the
mentality,
organizational,
basically.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're always going to have a group that's going to say like, "Hey, we should use these resources for a purpose."
No, 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 that's a good point because even if you look at the individualistic nature, right, where you say, okay, what if everybody just kind of develops this on their own? Once you get a group of people that are somewhat like-minded that have these same powers,
Hmm.
invariably they're going to get together. I mean, now that's not to say that every project has to, focus on that. I mean, I bring up the old Legends novel, I, Jedi. I, Jedi was actually
Mm.
one of the first ones to focus on a guy that's not part of the traditional, start like the Skywalker saga, basically.
Hmm.
Completely brand new, unknown character, runs into like nobody known was in that book. And it's about his struggle to, figure out his powers and everything else. I mean, it's been years since I've read it, but I remember it was an amazing book, and it shows you that you don't need to have this over reliance on the classic characters. I mean, we all love
Right.
them, and we all want to see more adventures with them, and I think that, but there's no reason why that has to be the only thing. Now, granted,
Hmm.
it's also a money thing, right? I mean, you can't saturate the market with a gazillion different Star Wars projects and have them all be good quality. I mean, I think that's been proven time and time again. But at the same time, I do think that, yes, there probably is an over-reliance on the Skywalker saga rather than letting it branch out and breathe a little bit. Okay, so now Travis has some more stuff here. The martial arts point is valid, but I feel martial arts in itself has several different organizations: Tai Chi, Karate, Kung Fu, so on. Jedi and Sith are two specific religions. And then he says, I think it's less of Force organizations going array rather than we generally only see the two major ones represented on screen when there are many others. I think they can lean into that. And look, that's a valid point too, right? We've gotten a little bit of that. We've had, the Dathomir witches.
Mm-hmm.
We've had there's a couple others. Well, I mean, you also had the father, the son, and the daughter, right? I mean, there's that.
Yeah.
You've seen some other
they're
ones.
kind of tied to the Force, though. But
They are, yeah. But I mean, well, that's what we're talking about. He's talking about we've only seen the Jedi and the Sith, and Travis's point is like, look, there's others that we can look at, and invariably, there's others that can be written, right? I mean,
to Travis's point, though, and this is kind of also, and I'm glad he brings that up, because this is also a this is kind of this is kind of the world between worlds conversation, because there's so many different directions we can go within this topic. That's why I said, like, this could be a two-parter, quite frankly. But so
well, hey, if we're
yes.
desperate for, if like nothing pops up on us next week, we're going, all right, we're doing part two.
Part two? Yep. But yeah, I mean, because you have a lot of different things, like the Bendu, for example. You still have and that could be explored, the whole gray Jedi thing. And that's what I'm talking about. It's like, what direction are they going to go in? Because are they going to stick to the dogma of the old guard with Yoda, or does Rey kind of, are they going to still bring kids who they find are Force sensitive? It's almost kind of like Charles Xavier, right? He would find these mutants with Cerebro, and then he would try to hunt them out and try to see if he can recruit them and bring them into his little school. Well, this Jedi were kind of doing the same thing. They were like using the Force, trying to find Force sensitive babies, bring them into the temple, and train them as Jedi, just because they were trying to safeguard. They were doing it more as a safeguard thing. Like, okay, if we get them and we teach them our way, because our way is morally right and better, then, and that's why a lot of people, even, a lot of people looked at the Jedi as self-righteous, because they're like, okay, well, who are you to say that this is the only way to use the Force? Why can't I use the Force this way? And that's why the Sith kind of had an argument, because they were like, look, I don't see anything, like, if I have a power that, no one else has, or very few people have, why can't I use it to my advantage? So that's the dogma. Are we going to continue to see that? Are there going to be more, or there's something going to be spawned out of that? Like, okay, you might not get Jedi and Sith, but you're right, it could create a completely different subgenre of Force wielders, and what are they going to do with it?
Well, you can even go into a direction. I mean, remember, technically, Ahsoka left the Jedi Order.
Yeah.
You could have a bunch of people who used to be Jedi doing
Maul
something
left
else.
The Sith.
And
well, he was more
Maul
kicked
left
out.
The Sith.
But...
Well, and then, of course, you have, I mean, not that this counts, but I should point this out, is that a lot of Jedi turn into Inquisitors, and that's kind of another classification of Force users.
Yeah,
although they did
or Asajj Ventress.
Yeah, she would be another one, right? Where she kind of started out on that Sith path, and then
she kind of became gray almost in a way.
Yeah, actually, yes.
Meshed her skin.
Yes. All right, Travis has a couple more. He says, and if you watch Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Zach creates the fighting style hip hop keto.
Oh my God, that was, you know what, Zach? You know what, Travis? It's so funny that you bring that up, because like, I was just talking to somebody, because I just watched the Power Rangers movie, the one from '95, just because I was bored, and I wanted something stupid and goofy to watch before I went to sleep. And granted, Zach wasn't in that one. However, yeah, I always thought that was like it was clever. They tried to do the whole capoeira thing with hip hop, which was okay. I see what they were doing, but as a martial artist myself, I was just like, this is stupid.
Yeah, there's a balance there. He also says we always hear about force sensitive being taken by Jedi as children. What happens when a family refuses or hides their child? There's an
Hmm.
anxiety in the Jedi Order may face of independent force users. Well, I hate to bring this up. The Acolyte tried to address that a little bit, actually.
Yeah,
Um, which I
yeah.
thought was actually one of the more interesting things about that.
Had they executed it properly, it would have been great.
Well,
you know.
yeah, in a lot of cases, because again, see, and that's another thing that we haven't really seen either, and we still haven't truly seen that, and that is a true Sith-centric series
Hmm.
where it focuses a little bit more on that. I think that even though, again, it's the same, I know it's the same two groups, but still, at least we would be seeing something we hadn't seen. Now,
Right.
there's another. I don't know if it was something that was like in the visual mediums, like a series or anything like that. But there was something, it might have been in a book, where they did explore a little bit the trauma that these families have sometimes of that. Now, sometimes you have the families willingly give them up, right? They see that, look, my kid's a force user. I don't know how to deal with this. I'm
Hmm.
not going to know how to deal with this. I'm not going to be able to cultivate and really grow this child's abilities. So yeah, I will go ahead and dedicate this child to the Jedi Order. There's other ones where it's not quite going down like that. So you definitely have that, right?
Hmm. You know what? You know what would be cool, and it just popped in my head. But I would love to see a series where you do almost like a Smallville version of the Jedi,
Oh yeah,
because
I can see
you
that.
have somebody like Jonathan Kent, right? Who you get this kid who has these abilities that I have no idea. I can't do any of this stuff. At least I don't think I do. So, but I have to try to raise this child to be a decent, good human being because that's what this family is. That's what we represent. But now, how do I? And then you also have that child who, as most children, you always have the initial. Well, you don't have to say initial. You always have the struggle of, peer pressure. Do I do the good thing or right thing? So they constantly are struggling with, you know, the consequences of just being human. But now you add the force element to it because now it draws you to the dark side. So then now you have those warring conflictions within a child without really a whole lot of Jedi oversight or help. And the Jedi might try to step in and say, "Hey, we can take them from you and teach them how to use this power." But the thing is, you'll never see them again because they will become a part of us, and we'll keep them safe as possible. But you won't have this relationship. The family could say, "Yeah, that sounds good, but I don't." Hey, we almost didn't think we could have this child. So no, I'm not going to just give my child up. So now I want to keep my child. Just kind of help me teach them how to deal with this thing. And it's like, well, I can't. I can give you some books and maybe, and but I can't really give you too much because it's kind of our thing. That would be a cool series to me.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things like that where I think that if they're going to get more into the micro, then they need to start really getting deep down because we're getting that a little bit with the politics of it. In the war side of things, now you're starting to see, you know, like board meetings,
Right.
in like imperial board meetings, or they're talking
Budget
about, different
committees.
things like that, where you're starting to see the more mid-level workings, because up until that
Mm,
point, obviously we saw the absolute top tier of the imperial officers and Vader and the Emperor and all that. And you would
mm,
see the very low ones, right? Stormtroopers would be going off on some, mission or something that they're supposed to accomplish. But very rarely did you get a window into the mid-level stuff that was going on until Andor. That's really the main one that gave you more of a sense of the galaxy. I mean, sure, you had it in some ways, like with things like the Bad Batch, but that was a lot of the animation. And even though that did a
yeah.
good job, it was really nice to see like a live action version where you are seeing, hey, this is how the galaxy is being affected by all of this, instead of the, you know, white hat, black hat, good versus evil, the more
Hmm.
macro themes. Now they're getting into more the minutia of some of this stuff, and they could do that on the Force side of things too. They could actually get a little bit more into kind of like what you're talking about. And I don't know, you could do that, focus on a family, and it's like, they're not really sure that they want to give up their kid or whatever, so they try to go it on their own. You could do it that way, or you can go into the Jedi Academy. I know they've tried some
Hmm.
animated shows on that. I know there's some books on that, but they could really get into some of the themes and some of the conflicts and some of the things that would happen on that level too. So, I mean,
Yeah,
there's I mean, if they want to stick with the two major groups, there are ways to do it that would make the franchise interesting. Now,
absolutely.
Travis has a couple more. Sort of like he has 2 points for everything we talk about. That's cool. A concept
I was too there.
I've never seen explored is the fact that the dark side exists in all people. All the dark emotions of the people of Coruscant adding to the dark side. Yeah, I know they hinted on that, but they never really truly focused on that. Are there Force therapists or Jedi missionaries who seek out sources of darkness like a person struggling emotionally and help them? That would be a cool concept. And that, yeah, I mean, right. Like kind of a, I don't know, some sort of bizarre, like Jedi Minority Report type of thing, right? Where you try, and they allude to that because anytime they sense darkness, they, I mean, it's not all like, I mean, I think, Luke maybe overreacted when he sensed darkness in
Oh, with Kylo.
Kylo and just immediately ignited his saber. It's like,
Well,
nope,
I think it
not
depends on how
today.
much darkness you have.
Well,
That's
yeah, I mean, right. I mean, look, he's the grandson of Vader, and it's like, you think anything like that could happen again, you're going to want to destroy it. But this does bring up a good point, too, right? And this goes into some of the genre things that we were talking about, where maybe you do something like a Law and Order version of Star Wars. Now, granted, that's what a lot of people, myself included, kind of thought the Mandalorian season 3 became. But the reason why we were critical of that was because that's not how the show was framed. It wasn't supposed to be that. But if you have something along the lines of, like a procedural type of a thing, or a series that maybe focuses on a certain element like that, where you have a group of Jedi that go out and try to maybe ward off some of the, if somebody is getting a little too dark and they're force sensitive, what do they do about it? That kind of thing. Um,
yeah. I mean, I think that would help, especially if you have people who, especially like parents who chose not to send their kids to the Jedi temple. Then you have, you might dispatch, hey, we kind of sense that your child or your loved one is battling some things. We just want to kind of help them out a little bit if they'll, you allow us. And you can kind of do things like that. But I think I wouldn't make an entire show on that. I think I would. I mean, you could. I mean,
well, a
but
lot
I
of this
think
is
you
exploration, right? I mean,
explore. Yeah, I think that at
maybe it's a
least.
movie. I don't know.
Or honestly, I would love to see that as a subplot in the movie.
Yeah,
And
like a
then
component
people
of
might
it.
people like, you know what? That's actually really cool. I want to see more of that. Then you do a series or another film on
Well,
that.
it would be nice if Disney actually reacted that way, right? Like, hey, we want to see more of this and actually do it. Um,
Hmm.
Travis says overreacting when his loved ones are threatened is a law Luke has from the beginning, and he never really gets over. Seeing Ben get cut down, being told by Jabba he's not getting Han. Yeah, he's like, even at his best, Luke reacts in anger and makes the situation worse for everyone. Ironically, it isn't until you get to the books, specifically like the Legends, the old expanded universe, that's when
Hmm.
Luke becomes more like the even tempered, like he loses that a little bit. Unfortunately, the Luke of the original trilogy, that made sense because obviously he was growing, right? He started out knowing nothing about the Force, and then he kind of had that little shaky in between period, and then he more or less calms down later on. Although he still let anger get the best of him, in Return of the Jedi, but then he stopped himself.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
you get that. And then, of course, the sequel trilogy Luke, they decided to go in a little bit of a different direction. But the expanded universe Luke, I think, was probably more of the balance because he represented a little bit more of the calm. He wasn't as susceptible to anger. He wasn't, it was more what you would expect Luke at that point in his life. But again, there's a bunch of different directions they could go. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you actually brought up something earlier too about even like force powers and stuff. Like,
Yeah, I was just about that was going to be actually my next my next stopping point was that, like, do you think we'll see any so we got in The Rise of Skywalker, we got a chance to see force healing a couple of times. We saw it with Rey with the snake, and then also when she did it with Ben, which imbued him with a lot enough light side ability that kind of uh, healed him. Not only just healed him physically, but also emotionally, I guess, in a lot of ways, which kind of was helping him push him back over to the edge into the light,
see, all
which
he
I think
needed
was
was a
lost for
hug.
a lot of people. Right, exactly. I think that part was lost for a lot of people because a lot of
It
people didn't
was.
understand, like, why he all of a sudden they're like, how did he just all of a sudden become a good guy, like, it just out of nowhere. I was like, no, well, because he saw Han. I'm like, no, and I explained it to him. He was like, oh, I'm like, yeah, most people didn't catch that. So there's that. They also explored the whole dyad thing. So that's what I'm saying. Like, there are certain things where, Kylo's on a ship and he can reach and grab Rey, who's completely on another planet, and pull something from her reality, basically. We've seen the world between a lot of different things. So are they going to explore more things like that in the Force going forward? Are we going to see those, crazy Star Wars shorts where, or the things we see in video games where you're pulling Star Destroyers out of the sky, or, there's an army of troopers coming and you wave your hands and, everyone go flying? Are we going to see that type of stuff? I think in this day and age, and this is the struggle, because I feel like we're in this weird paradox between wanting to see something fantastic, but then at the same time, we want everything to be grounded now. And my thing is, like, when you look at, like, things that are supposed to be fantastic, I want to be fantastic, you know, but I don't want it so over the top where it's just like, okay, this looks so ridiculous, I can't even get into it. Like watching the Avengers stuff, I don't think any of that was really grounded, because I think it was pretty accurate for
Well,
what
in
the
but
characters
but
were.
there is a difference between if you're talking about the actual films, MCU.
Yeah.
So the beginning, phase one, essentially, the first standalone movies leading up to the first Avengers movie, that I would say was, we can use the word grounded, even though, yeah, we're talking about comics or whatever. But as a lot of people are fond of saying, I mean, those were actually real movies with real depth. It just featured comic book characters, though.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is,
But I
for
mean,
example,
well, I know what you're saying, but I'm just saying, even in their use of their powers, even in everything like that, it still honored the
mhm,
comics, but it wasn't the crazy, like how Marvel ended up getting almost like how the Transformers got, where it was just so over the top that, now you're just like, okay. I mean, even the comics a lot of times don't go that crazy. It's because they can. And that's the problem. It's like, well, how much of it do you do because you can? Now, I'll tell you what the problem is with the Force. You have to be careful because, again, you don't want to get to the Superman problem where you create, and they almost did this in the expanded
mhm,
universe with Luke, where you create such a godlike figure that who you're going to get to go up against them that, wouldn't lose immediately. It's almost like you have to make these increasingly crazy over the top villains. Now, the biggest, most ingenious thing they did was when they came up with the Yuuzhan Vong. Because what they did was they didn't come up with an equally godlike enemy. They came up with a race.
The complete opposite.
Yeah, where the Force doesn't even work on them. Like, it's not even a thing. So it's kind of like, okay, all of Luke's nearly godlike command over the Force was useless. And even their lightsabers didn't even really work because, it's like, I mean, you had to hit them at a certain point in their biological armor in order to penetrate it. So, there's that.
And what is it called? Salamari? That Theron kind of kept around him, that kind of created the force bubble.
Yeah.
So I mean, even things like that, I think that was clever.
Yeah, that was
especially for someone like him. Like, that's very Theronish. Like, if I didn't know about this prior to, like, if I would have just heard that, I'm like, yeah, that's something Thrawn would definitely be carrying around with him. Just because, it's kind of like Superman's kryptonite in a way. Like, Batman would carry like a little piece of kryptonite with him. But yeah, I mean, do you think that people will want to see or have that pushed? Or do you think people will kind of like, no, let's keep it almost like original trilogy and the sequel trilogy? I think the sequels got it right in some ways. Like, Luke, that whole force projection thing, I think that was genius. I mean, of course, we all wanted to see Luke battle, and sure, but to really solidify, like, okay, his mastery of the Force, and like, okay, Luke at this point is a grandmaster. We want to see this because we basically have grown up with him. We didn't grow up with Yoda. Yoda was practically dying, by the time we got to him anyway. So I wasn't really expecting a whole lot of that. Now, I expected to see it when they did the prequels because, of course, obviously he's younger. So when I see him, absorbing Force lightning with his hand, that was impressive. Especially him going over to the Emperor and he's just like waves his little fingers and the Emperor goes not only just flying across the room, but then he flips over to them. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's the Yoda I want to see because he's Yoda. He's the he's basically the Dumbledore or the Grandmaster. He's the guy. So when we got to Luke, that was fitting. I was glad that we got a chance to see, and they gave him something unique, though, that was like, okay, we have never seen this before. It was clever. It was all of that. And I really just can tip my hat to them for that. The dyad thing in the Force,
yeah, I don't know if I was in love with that.
Yeah,
either,
I wasn't really on the. I mean, it was cool in a way, but then at the same, but because there's no explanation, we have never heard. I mean, like,
I think that might
if they were talking about it throughout the movie or something like that, and then we realized, like, okay, yeah, then they finally become that.
It was people just going, okay, what could we do to make this different? To make it different.
Exactly.
But here's my thing, and this is what I would hope. My problem is that, and of course, we always say, story is king. You have to serve the story or whatever. That goes without saying. At least it should. Yep. But I feel like I should frame it just in case somebody's watching for the first time,
right,
and haven't seen our other 300 or whatever episodes we've done. So story is always king. But here's my issue that I've always had with the films in particular, is the fact that they'll give these Jedi like these crazy powers, Sith too, for that matter. But it's like they won't. Like, there's times during the movies where I'm like, why don't you just insert Force power here? Yeah, right? Like, if you really had the power, you would use it right now. But because it's not serving whatever plot at that moment, because maybe it would make it too easy, or maybe there wouldn't be tension or whatever, they don't use it, but that becomes more frustrating. So my thing is, I don't necessarily need like the video games to see these guys pulling down Star Destroyers or throwing planets out of orbit, although, again, if it's appropriate, fine. I would just like to see consistency of the use of the Force. That's really where my head is at. Is look,
I got you.
if you're going to give somebody like the whole like Force, let's just take something really simple like the super speed thing. How many times in the original trilogy can you think of where like that would have probably have been a good idea? Or even in any of the TV shows or anything like that. It's like, okay, look, if you have that power, you're going to use it. And the problem is that sometimes they'll have the Jedi do certain things and then they won't have them do that very same thing, even though it would be very much appropriate. And if they really had the power, they would do it. But because it would probably be too simple of a, you know what I mean? It's kind of like, well, wait, we can't have them do that because then it doesn't, move the plot the way that we want.
Well, I will say this. To that point, I'm with you. Number one, 100%. I think what even strengthens your point is when you have when you use characters who've already exhibited that ability and they don't use it, as opposed to others. Because I can get with the whole thing, like, okay, everybody might not be trained in that. Super speed, for example.
I don't know. Some of these things
you could kind of
they go through the whole little Jedi thing, I think that this is okay, you could probably make that argument. I don't know, man. If it wasn't for a Jedi Academy and they're going through all this stuff, to me, that's one of the more basic things. Just like they can all use telekinesis.
Well, yeah, I get, I think there are certain ones, but then I think there's certain, because I think they pair certain Jedi or younglings with certain Jedi for certain tests. It's kind of like the military, right? Like, not everybody who, when you go to boot camp, you get basic training, but then, if you spend most of your career, as a medic, you're not really, you were trained on how to use the M16 or something like that, but you might have to, you might fumble with it at first if you haven't used it in a while.
If you want to start going on the Guardians versus the Sentinels and all that stuff, but I'm talking about
the ones that's going out on missions.
Ones that are going out on missions. I'm not talking about medics and, healers and all this other stuff. This is a very basic thing. This is not, and I could use this example even with telekinesis, which is something that inarguably every Jedi knows. And Absolutely. There's a lot of times they don't use it when I know full well, if in a real situation, you would do that.
Right.
You would use it, but they don't use it.
Case in point. With Return of the Jedi, he's talked about this all the time in the Rancor scene. Luke could have used the Force to close that door on the Rancor.
Oh, here's another thing he could have done.
He didn't even pick up the rock, or he could have blew up his heart, or whatever.
Or Force choked him. He Force choked the Gamorrean guard.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of things, but again, it wouldn't have been as exciting for the kids. And I was one of them. I was 12 years old when that came out. So, I get it. It's a little bit more cool to let the Rancor grab him, and he's got the bone thing in his hand, and, putting the thing in and doing the whole door thing. Yeah, sure, that's more exciting, but that's my point. My point is that they do that. Sometimes I can overlook it because, the other thing you can look at, too, is that maybe in the stress of the situation, you're you're not thinking, right? You can, so there's a lot of arguments that we can make about it. All right, look, there's a lot of chats in here that we should probably get to before it gets too crazy. I have to scroll to get to all these. Most of them are from Travis, but Ted's got a few in there as well. So
okay.
So Travis begins. My defense is that with Vader, it took cutting off his hand for him to realize how far he went. With Ben Solo, he doesn't need to bring his sword down once to realize he's better than that. just like an insecurity one may have about themselves, they could put it in the work, make progress. Second, somebody insults them, the retreat within themselves, which is what Luke did. Then he goes on to say, interesting you bring up force healing. I was rewatching E.T., of course, has many Star Wars nods, and that species exists in the Phantom Menace. E.T. does many force things, including healing. And yes, we talked about that, actually. Actually, we talked about that at length. I don't remember what show it was. I remember we got off on this whole tangent about the ETs and the Force or something. He says not only does ET heal, but he links with Elliot, getting drunk when the other does. Yeah, I forgot about that. Feeling each other's pain and emotions, almost exactly like a Force dyad. And then,
or like those twins that in the man, the twins that were
well, if you get
the High
beyond
Republic,
the twins,
the High.
oh yeah, the High Republic ones. Yeah, I don't remember their names.
Yeah, High Republic
I
one. Yeah,
don't even remember their names. But you're right. That's exactly it. While the canonicity of ET in Star Wars is questionable, it made me imagine a world long before the Jedi where Force found people, made connections with them, awakening the Force within them. And, hey, maybe we get that, right? Ted then chimes in, it's hard for most writers to figure out how to tell stories with a power as potentially as strong as the Force. It's like writing for Superman or the Flash.
True.
Yeah, and that's what we were talking about. I always refer to the Superman problem because that's what happens. You keep adding powers to this guy, and pretty soon it's like, well, nobody could defeat him. That's why you got to give him kryptonite, right? Then Travis continues, at least one youngling used the Force to wipe themselves instead of their hand. That's just more sanitary. You can do that.
Yep.
Get like a little Force bidet going.
I was just about to say a Force bidet.
It's like, Force plumbers. Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
Travis said Luke could have shunned that bone where the twin suns don't shine. Yeah, he could have done that too. Give him a little prostate
animal
exam. Yeah. Sarek and Tarek. Yes, thank you. Yes. Those were the twins. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. That's exactly right. You do see that a little bit. But, and Ted alluded to it too. Look, it's tough to write that, and I understand that. And I'm not saying that it has to be like absolute consistency, because I know that would probably be impossible, because again, this isn't real life, right? I mean, sure, there's times where maybe somebody would actually use a power, but you can't write it that way because you have to move the plot in a certain way. So the writer has to figure out a way around that. I totally get that, and I'm not questioning that, and I understand that. But what I'm saying is, can we have just a little bit more consistency, and can we make it a little less jarring and obvious where you're yelling at the screen? Like, just use telekinesis like you do the other 100,000 times, right? Because here's the problem.
Right. You picked up the fruit, but you couldn't do this, huh?
Well, that's it, exactly. Something like that, right? But I mean, and I think the way that you do that, the way you fix that problem, is you just introduce something that maybe prevents them. Like, for instance, when you need Superman not to use X-ray vision, you just have something encased in lead. Oh, crap, I can't see through it. It's encased in lead. Well, there you go. When you need to weaken him, you do the kryptonite thing. I mean,
or the red sun.
Or, yeah, right. Or he's in a red sun thing, or he's, I mean, there's just like all kinds of different things that you can do in order to nullify the powers, or just for that moment. You can do that if you need to get a character from point A to point B, but you don't want them to use a power that they would very obviously use in a real situation. Well, then you just put some other obstacle that prevents them from using that. But they don't do that. I mean, it's like, and I get that Lucas is writing this for kids. I know Lucas himself would be like, you guys are thinking too deeply, man. It's not sci-fi. It's really more fantasy. Sci-fi is about the details and the micro.
Well, I mean, I think you brought up a point a good point without bringing it up. Do you think that Star Wars should? Because I know that was George's initial intent, but like you say, this franchise is 50 years old. Do you think we should keep that mindset, or should we elevate Star Wars beyond kids and say, like, okay, this is more now for teens and adults?
No, I actually think you could do both. I think that,
Okay.
you need to do what Lucas. Look, I mean, Lucas had a lot of really good moral messages in there, and it really, that's part of the reason why it's so timeless, because it really appeals to that kid in all of us. It's a
Mhm.
very moral of the story, good versus evil, that kind of a thing. The problem is he created such a rich universe that, of course, everybody has expanded on, that it also does beg, because you have these great characters, it does beg for a more, um, and it's not adult in the sense of like, oh yeah, we're gonna up the violence, or sexual themes or
Right.
something like that. It's really more the complexity of storytelling. That's
It's
really
more
what we're
advanced.
talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
and you could do that, but because there's so much, you could do both, and they sort of are, right? You had Skeleton Crew, you had Resistance. These are more for like the young kids. The other thing they could do is maybe keep, like the actual films sort of neutral like that, and then you can expand on it. Like for instance, you get something like Rogue One, even though Rogue One wasn't really a total kids thing either, but it did fall into that Star Wars feeling thing. Well, what did they do?
Maybe
They
Solo.
expanded on it. They created Andor, and Andor was very much a more complex adult themed series. It's not for kids. So you can actually create, I think, in this franchise, various projects for that are more along the lines of what Lucas was doing, but then also expand on them. I don't necessarily think you have to do an either or situation.
Well, no, I guess what I'm saying, like, if you do, like you said, like, I think you have a section of things like, okay, it's almost like school, like, all right, kids, here's the Star Wars for kids. And then this is where, when you grow up, now you can graduate and go to these classes of Star Wars. And then this is more adult themed, so to
Yeah,
speak.
absolutely. I mean, there's no reason why you can't do that. There's no reason why you have to make the choice. And I think the problem is, as long as Disney is trying to do this profit-driven storytelling, which is essentially what I call it, because that's what
Hmm.
it is. They
Oh,
want
yeah,
the
honey.
$2 billion movie. They want that Star Wars, lines around the block, but they forgot what brought everybody out in the first place. Look, everybody's going, oh, well, we were kids when Star Wars came out and it was for us. And, now we're adults and whatever. But everybody forgets that adults back then were just as psycho about Star Wars as the kids were. Look,
Yeah, but
I didn't have to drag my dad out to the theater to see it. I'm like,
we
man, I'd
dragging
like to,
you.
do. It's like, hey, let's go see Star Wars again, right? Because I mean, it appealed to something in everybody. I think it's really more about dealing with broad themes and painting with broad strokes rather than getting into like the super details. I mean, that's what Star Trek does. That's why Star Trek and Star Wars appeal, even though a
They're
lot of
different.
the fans cross. Everybody will always be either a little bit more Star Wars or a little bit more Star Trek, because Star Trek
Hmm.
appeals more to the to the cerebral, technical minded,
Hmm.
like true sci-fi fan. Whereas Star Wars appeals a little bit more to the imaginative, or fantasy fan. But it has definite sci-fi elements to it. All right, let me get some more chats. Um, Travis says, going further into the ET thing, when ET sees a kid dressed like Yoda, interesting. He does not say friend, he says home, which maybe implies those species are from the same world. Yeah, well, it's funny. I'll get to that in a second, because it was either, I think it was George Lucas that brought this up. He says there's a fantastic book called Lost Stars. Oh yeah, we know. We
Mm.
know about Lost Stars. It came out
Yep.
before The Force Awakens. It was a teen romance novel of sort dealing with a boy and a girl growing up and participating in the original trilogy. Such a fantastic book. Yeah,
It was.
we
Yep.
covered. I don't think we actually reviewed it, but we did.
No,
We
but we
covered
basically
it
kind of we did. We kind of did.
yeah, we kind of did. I mean, it. The thing about it is that was an example of what we were talking about when you can. First of all, one of the things that we've always said was even if they didn't want to do it with the expanded universe books, all the new canon books, for the most part, are incredible. I mean, they could just make movies out of those.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Lost Stars, because anything that Claudia Gray writes, we're like a huge fan. You know,
Yep.
Bloodline's another, phenomenal book. Lords of the Sith, fantastic. The
Yep.
Tarkin book is amazing. I mean, there's even the new Thrawn trilogy that Timothy Zahn wrote. Well, he actually wrote two different ones. There's a Thrawn Ascendancy, which I'm still in book 2. But the Thrawn trilogy that he wrote for the new canon, that's incredible. I mean, there's so much that they could be doing. And even if you didn't want to adapt it, if you look at the storytelling of Lost Stars, the appealing thing about it is that he stayed more with the rebellion. She ended up joining. Well, they were actually both in the Empire.
Mm-hmm.
He was the one that realized first that the Empire wasn't what they were saying that they were. And he ended up joining the rebellion. And now you had these two, people who were in love but find themselves on opposite sides.
Mm-hmm.
It's very similar to what you saw in the book and eventually TV miniseries North and South, where they were talking about the American Civil War, and you had family members that were on opposite sides. You had couples that were on opposite sides. It was kind of like that kind of a thing, but it was done really well because it humanized the Empire a little bit. You find that a lot of these people had no idea what was going on, and we're just going to work every day essentially, and it really put the Death Star because it showed like these people had friends that were on the first Death Star when it blew up, and it really made you think about a lot of different things. And if they just brought that kind of storytelling into future projects, no matter what they
Yeah.
are, I think that
They
would be
even had a
good.
little bit of that in Andor with
100%, yeah.
with Mom Mothma's family, like that whole
Yeah.
drama that
Oh
she was
man,
had with her husband and
I
her kid.
know.
Like, man, that just shows you.
See, and if they had actually even concentrated on that, like if they just came out with Mothma, the series or whatever, like you could have carried that because again,
Mm-hmm.
you had the family dynamic, but then you also had the shell of it kind of looked like the Republic that we all knew from the prequels, but the Senate pods weren't as full.
Mm-hmm.
It was
People were dropping out,
yeah, I
and
mean it was kind of like it was almost like keeping up appearances. It was more of just like for show,
mm-hmm.
but it wasn't really what was, and you felt that emptiness, like we're just keeping up appearances, but it's not the reality. And they could really do something phenomenal with that if they wanted to expand on that. But of course, for this particular show, we're talking, and who knows, maybe that's maybe that's something we do. And we have the future of the Force. Maybe you do the future of whatever, politics in the Star Wars. I don't know, whatever it may be. But when you're focusing more on the war, you can
Mm-hmm.
tell more stories like that. But I don't necessarily think they're having a problem with that. I think they're actually on the right track when it comes to that. I mean, we'll see
Yeah.
with this Starfighter movie.
Yeah.
Because it looks like that's going to be more in the vein of like your Andor, because it's basically like Top Gun in space, right?
Yeah. But I think you just have to. I think what's going to be interesting is like now, what do you create now? We've had the Empire, we've had the First Order, so like now you have to create another regime that's really going to.
Yeah, because when you look at when you look at things, the only two things that I know of, again, anybody in the chat and in the comment section after the fact, correct me if I'm wrong, but the only two post Rise of Skywalker projects we have are this like Rey movie that may or may not come out,
Mm-hmm.
and Starfighter.
Mm-hmm.
Starfighter takes place, I think, something like 10 years after. So if that's the case, it would take place about 5 years before the Rey movie, 10 years after Rise of Skywalker. Who's the villain?
Mm-hmm.
And what is the villain? Now, in the Starfighter thing, I don't know if they're going to do kind of a just like in the post Return of the Jedi era, you basically had remnants of the Empire and all that. Are you going to have remnants of the First Order or Final Order? You know, are you like, how's that even going to look? Because beyond the more mystical villains, like your Sith or, you know, something maybe like the Yuuzhan Vong, something like that, are you going to have a more like organized group?
Governmental or
Yeah, like a
organized.
governmental thing. Exactly. Something that would challenge the Republic at large. Because here's another thing, and this is something that we've talked about in the past too. One of the things that the sequel trilogy did wrong was The Force Awakens, they basically took out like Hosnian, they took out the entire Republic, right? I mean, the resistance that Leia more or less started was like the only somewhat functioning government left. I mean, they obliterated the entire Republic, at least from a governmental standpoint. So, well, they never really brought that up. It's, you know, that would be like if in the prequels they blew up Coruscant and then just never addressed it. You know, it's like, well, you gotta. So we don't even know at the time of, say, the Starfighter movie. We don't even know who is the Republic even there. I mean, with 10 years, somebody's got to be there.
Yeah, somebody's got to do something.
So I mean, you know, forget the villainous organization. What hero organization do we have? Do we have another like the New Republic? Or?
Well, that's the thing, because see, and that's a very valid point, because see, the Jedi supported the Republic. So if Rey creates a new Jedi Order, are they going to be in line with supporting whatever the government, or are they kind of an entity unto themselves? These are questions you have to ask now, because part of the problem was like, well, that's how we got roped up into this thing in the first place, was because we were attached to the government. We were kind of like a special battalion, you know, to the military almost in a way. But then we are like ambassadors,
Right.
and then we're like, you know, so we have all these different things. But it's like, if we rebuild this, are we going to rebuild it the same and let it function the same way, or are we going to be like a standalone?
I don't think so, only because if you look back, even at the old Republic days, you know, it wasn't quite maybe as organized, but there was still like a relationship between the Republic then and the Jedi. And then, of course, you had the High Republic. So during the days of the High Republic, I think the Jedi were more intertwined, just from everything I read. You know, again, I admit I haven't read every book in the High Republic series, but I've read enough that there was a little bit more of an integration between the two. And then, of course, we have the Republic that we know of from the prequels. And then by the time of the sequel trilogy, it seemed like, I mean, there really wasn't a Jedi Order at that point. So I would imagine that Rey creating a new Jedi Order would probably be tied to some sort of whatever the governing organization is, whether it's another Republic, you know, the New Republic, or you know, whatever they call it. Yeah, right. Yeah. You know, if it's something like that, then I can see that. But it does beg the question, though, like you said. I mean, what's the relationship to it, though? Is it going to be more functioning parallel to it, or is it going to be a part of it? Is it going to be completely detached from it? We don't really know. I mean, I would think that if she starts an entire, you know, like a whole, like a real proper Jedi Order, and it's not just like 4 people, then yeah, you would think that whatever the governing body is would want a little say in it. Like, hey, you guys, what's that? What's the thing? The Adventurers Accord or something? What was that?
Oh,
Like
the
agreement?
Sokovia Accord.
Yeah, the Sokovia Accord.
Accord.
Yeah. All right, so we got some new people. We got David, of course. Hello, gentlemen. It's Star Wars Day. Glad you can, make it. And then Thronkill's back. It says Mara Jade will save us all.
Oh.
Well, hey, that's another one too. We've brought this up on numerous shows. It's like, will they ever bring Mara Jade into the new canon? I mean, there's been rumors. We even did a show on it. You guys could go back and check it out. We actually did full blown, our show on who should play her, or what was it, like our top 5 choices or something like that. That might have even been 10. It was either top 5 or top 10. It was one of the two. But again, how much of the expanded universe do they want to bring in now? Because I made this argument before that you could still do it. You could still make the Thrawn trilogy, even though you'd have to change some things. But you could, story-wise, essentially bring that in. It just depends on what you want to do. I don't think they're going to do that post-sequel trilogy, though. That would be more appropriate to do in a post-Return of the Jedi world, kind of like in the Mandalorian timeline.
Right.
But yeah, it's really interesting. What are they going to do? Because there's a lot of Force powers, even when we're looking at these characters like Vader and the red lightning thing. It's the only lightning I think he was able to use or something. Red lightning is actually the most powerful of the Force lightnings. That's something I don't believe we've ever seen in any kind of live action yet. But you also got to wonder what Grogu is doing. Is he going to factor in? That species lives
hundreds and hundreds of years.
Hundreds and hundreds of years. I mean, the sequel trilogy is only 30 years after Return of the Jedi. Even if you go another 15 for Rey's thing, you're only talking 45 years after Return of the Jedi.
He was already only, 50?
He was 50 years old. He'd be 95. He'd be almost 100. So it's that would be prime. I think that his species hits their prime when they're a couple hundred, 2 or 3, 300 years old, I think is full blown, like a 30 or 25 or 30-year-old human. So you do have a possibility of seeing some of these Force powers. Like I said, I just want to see more consistency. I don't necessarily have a wish list of powers I'd like to see. Didn't we do a show like that 4 or 5 years ago? We did some. I remember we did a Force power show.
Yeah.
I remember doing it because I remember there was all these weird ones.
Yeah.
that we brought out. Really, that's a Force power? I mean,
or Force birthday or something.
Yeah, it was something. It was something weird. Let's see. Thronkill says, after the Rise of Skywalker, shouldn't they be called the Second Order? Yeah, I mean, exactly. It's what? Well, no, because the Rise of Skywalker, they were the final order. So, I mean, just like Friday the 13th Part 4 was the final chapter, right?
Yeah.
Look, it made a ton of money. It's not the final order. All right, so Ted says, the toughest thing is how does a writer tackle the application of the Force and the tenets of a new Jedi Order without it being taken as a commentary on modern social values, even if it's not intended? I actually don't think that's a problem. I don't think that's a problem, and I'll tell you why. I think it's because, again, it's the macro versus micro. You're talking about broad themes. So you really don't necessarily have to have any kind of current social commentary. Obviously you can take, it's sort of you could even back in the late 70s, early 80s, you could take the original trilogy and you could apply it to that, what was then modern times,
Hmm.
but it wasn't necessarily a reflection of it because it was timeless. Again, that's what made it timeless. It's the timelessness of the original trilogy that, and the fact that it was done very well, that made it what it was and made it as successful as it was. It wasn't trying to do all that. And I think
Well,
that,
yeah.
I mean, I understand what Ted's saying too. It's like how you define the modern, like the Jedi, Rey's like Jedi Order.
Hmm.
I mean,
Without
again,
social commentary. I mean, you can.
yeah, I think you can.
I think you can apply a lot of different things. You just have to be mindful, and just be very mindful of like, okay, what path, not to sound like, I mean, this is a Star Wars show, but you have to be mindful of what path you're going down, and that's what you really
Yeah,
have to look for. It's
just keep it broad. Just keep it.
yeah, like you
Don't
said,
get
keep it a broad strokes and
no
don't try to be.
specificity. Don't that was a problem I think the Acolyte had. I think the Acolyte was trying to do that in some cases, and it just isn't what Star Wars is. It wasn't what it was intended to do. It was, it's not intended to be a commentary on current social issues because, again, I mean, you do that, it destroys the timelessness of it. If, like, for instance, when Lucas created the Empire, sure, you could point and say, oh, they're kind of like the Nazis or whatever, but it's sort of like fascism is, I mean, that's all through history, right? You could you could even say it's like the Roman Empire if you wanted. I mean, again, it's a broad thing. There wasn't anything specific. Now you could, the whole Ewok thing, the primitives versus, like high technology, some of that was truly an allegory for the Vietnam War, but it was also, again, it wasn't dealing specifically with that. It was the concept. It wasn't specifically what went on during the war. It was the concept of a more primitive thing versus like high tech. So if you keep it broad, I think you're okay. Even when you're dealing with redefining the Force and what it is and, how you want these Jedi to be or whatever. Then Thronkill says, the exposition is going to be needed in Starfighter to explain the current state of the galaxy is going to be yikes. Decisions will have to be made and a direction taken. That's actually a good point, too, because it looks like Starfighter is going to be the first thing that we see post Rise of Skywalker. It's not going to be the Rey movie. So whatever they establish in Starfighter will sort of inform us, who's in charge, who are they fighting, that kind of thing. So then by the time the Rey movie comes out, or I think it's supposed to be a trilogy, actually, by the time the Rey movie or movies come out, it'll give us a little bit more of a framework. We'll know what we're dealing with. I mean, obviously, they would have to come up with some, if they don't do a Force user, it would have to be somebody like a Thrawn or a Yuuzhan Vong or something that can go up against Force users. That's a good point.
Yeah, definitely. I think we definitely have a lot of. Oh wow, it's like hour 15 already. See,
Oh yeah, well, I mean,
and
you
we still
you
and we
said
still
it.
and we
You said
still
at the
do.
beginning of the
Yeah.
show, this is going to get into some stuff, and of course, look, I credit to our people chatting in because
Hmm.
this is the kind of thing that makes this show the most fun. This is the kind of thing that this show was designed for. That's why I hate it when it's just you and I talk. I mean, not that it's like, oh man, please spare me from, but it's true. It's like this is designed to be a community chat, like we're all hanging out talking Star Wars and coming up on a concept. And I think it's because of the topic. The last, if I'm being honest, the last couple of shows wasn't really setting the world on fire as far as views and anything else like that. But this, we've had a lot of live views, probably the most live views we've had in a while. And look at all the chatting that's been done. And that's because this is something that people could really sink their teeth into. And I think that's why this has been a really good, lively, great discussion. Something that we can continue certainly next week. Whether we do a part 2 of this or whether now we turn our attention to more of the war part of it instead of the lore. A lot of different directions we can go. And you guys can always chat in and tell us what you want to see from us. Yeah. What do what do you want us to talk about? We're more than willing to talk about whatever you guys want to. You could do that either in the comments section on this or any other video, or you can do it on our Discord channel. You look in the description. You can join the Discord. There's actually a spot for show ideas and topic ideas among a bunch of other stuff in there. So, don't forget to do that. And of course, being that we're winding down, I got to say it. Don't forget to hit the like button. If you enjoyed this and you enjoyed the discussion, you want to see more of it, hit the subscribe button. And if you do hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell because, as Ted pointed out, beginning of this show, that's part of how he knew when we were going on, because we were supposed to go on yesterday. Now we're on today, and if you hit the notification bell, you'll always know when we go live. All right? So I guess that's going to do it for us tonight. Thanks again to everybody who chatted live. This was a lot of fun, and we hope to do it again next week. And with that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the force be with you, always.